Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we are going to review Shadow of the Galaxy as an expansion. So, about 4 months have passed since the release of the second set of Star Wars Unlimited, and as Star of the Republic is about to come out, I think it's a good time to take a look back at Shadow of the Galaxy and give some feedback about the expansion. Overall, what part of the expansion were really good, what part of the expansion were not so good, and kind of draw like a picture on how positive or negative of an impact this expansion had on the game. So the objective of this kind of video is to give my opinion on the from a more of a game design standpoint and as a player as well, and maybe the devs can look back on those videos and kind of think about how they can improve the game. And for people who are viewing, it's a good opportunity to have a little bit of fun and talk about and say goodbye to this part of the game. So without further ado, let's take a bit of context here. I did this for the first time with Spark of Rebellion. Spark of Rebellion was obviously an excellent expansion that I rated a 8.5 out of 10. I took into account here the artwork on the rating, and I feel like this was a little bit unfair because the artwork is pretty much going to be the same quality across all the expansions, which means that I think that, to be fair, I think that if you don't take into account the art, I think the Spark of Rebellion deserved a 10 out of 10 a 9 out of 10 overall. Not a perfect expansion, but it was by far one of the best set one I've ever seen in a game, and I think greatly contributed to the initial success of Star Wars Unlimited. So now it's going to see, of course, Shadow of the Galaxy. How does Shadow Galaxy compare to Spark of Rebellion now that we have an element of comparison? And we're going to go through this right now. So first of all, we'll talk about the positive of this expansion. What does this expansion do well? The first thing is the theme. So theme is very important in expansion. The theme of this expansion was basically underworld, bounty hunters, and smugglers and all this kind of part of the universe of Star Wars that is not really about the good guys, nor is it about the bad guys. It's a little bit kind of in a gray area where you get a lot of those interesting characters that are not fighting for the rebellion or the Imperials. They are kind of like taking advantage of the war situation that is going on. And I feel like from a thematic standpoint, this expansion worked out pretty well. The mechanics really work very well with the characters that they are depicting without being too complicated and convoluted to understand. You have this idea of trying to the smuggle mechanics and all the capturing and I thought and putting bounties on stuff. I think overall the theme of the expansion was very well done, in my opinion. Second positive of this expansion is the smuggle mechanics, which I think was a great success. It's a mechanic that Souls plays in Draft and Limited, and also Soul play in Constructed, and it was not overpowered. It was perfectly balanced. We saw a lot of even cards like Covert Strength, which didn't look like constructed playable smuggle cards, ended up seeing some play in Constructed. We obviously got Ultra 20-44 blasters, which saw play in a lot of decks, and also Tech, which really gave Heroism a lot of more of late game capabilities, which I think they really needed. So I think that overall, also what I like about the smuggle mechanics is that it added more options to the players at their disposal. It was a very skill-intensive mechanic where players had additional things that they could do during their turns on top of just playing the cards from their hand. And I think this has really made the game a lot better, in my opinion. I think smuggle mechanic really made the game a lot better. The only small negative about smuggle as a mechanic is that we haven't seen really a dedicated smuggle archetypes really working in Constructed. Some people were playing on Onaka and Lando Calrissian smuggle decks, but those decks unfortunately were just a tiny, not quite strong enough. I feel like this would have been, I would have gave this mechanic a perfect 10 out of 10 score if only Ondo Onaka and Lando had been pushed a little bit more. Second positive is the bounty mechanic. I think that bounty did manage to be a relevant archetype in Constructed. It is mostly due to Bosk being an excellent bounty payoff leaders, and I feel like if FFG wants to make leaders that are really trying to push a specific mechanic for Constructed, I think Bosk is a great example of this. I feel like it was pretty balanced overall. He made red-black a lot more relevant in the meta. And he did manage to, and we also got a lot of strong bounty cards. I think the two best example that comes to my mind is the Client and Bounty Hunter Quarry. But I would say that almost the vast majority of bounty cards were actually playable in competitive. There were some strong bounties in every colors. So I think overall the bounty mechanics worked out pretty good, and the fact that we had multiple bounty archetype we could play, either Bosk mid-range, Bosk ramp, or Bosk control. This basically gave some really much needed new blood to the game. At least one archetypes from Shadow of the Galaxy that were actually worked out, and that was really good. That was really nice to see. Other than positive is like blue-white mid-range decks in general were just a lot more present in the meta. This expansion mostly on the back of the new Han blue or Ray red. Both of those decks have managed to make a significant splash in the metagame. In Spark of Rebellion, blue-white archetypes were not super powerful. A couple of people, you were seeing some Luke green seeing play and some Chirrut red doing stuff, but it was not really that relevant. They were still like tier 2 and even tier 3 archetypes overall, while blue-white midrange now is a real tier 1 blue-white, specifically blue-white red. But we also saw some blue-white green doing well, with notably Boba, the new Boba Fett green. So the fact that blue-white, basically in Spark of Rebellion, the main way to play Rebel was either to play a Sabine aggro deck or to play Old Han archetypes. Now there is a third way to play heroism, and that's through the blue-white mid-range route. And I think that's very positive for the game. Similarly to the blue-white archetype, it is now also possible to play aggro villainy decks thanks to Shadow of the Galaxy. In Spark of Rebellion, really, there were no... the only aggressive deck you could really play were either the Sabine aggro or the Leia aggro, and those two decks were fairly similar from one another. Now it is possible to play aggro decks that are mostly based on villainy, with Cad Bane, which did manage to make a splash in the meta despite its weakness to Boba. Kylo Ren, which, yes, granted, it is not the most competitive decks in the meta, but it still was we still saw a significant amount of Kylo Ren decks making it to top 8 to various tournaments. And obviously the Tarkin yellow deck, which I'm sure even FFG did not necessarily predict that it would be that good, but this deck has managed to consistently made some top 8 performances. Especially, it's funny because I really thought this deck was going to perform very well early on in the meta and then become a bit worse as time goes on, and it kind of went the opposite way, where the deck really did not perform so well early on, but re-emerge as a force later on in the game lifespan. In the later season of the PQ, we saw multiple Tarkin yellow decks making performances. So it was really nice to see some aggro villainy archetypes making an appearance in the game, and definitely we can give credit to Shadow of the Galaxy for that. Now let's talk about the negatives, and there are quite a few negatives on this expansion. The first negative is that the legendary were not very exciting overall, and this is a very big deal because it means that opening packs of Shadow of the Galaxy was significantly less exciting than in Spark of Rebellion, because basically, yeah, there was a couple of cool legendaries like Poe Dameron and Cray Dragon, but outside of those two particular cards, maybe Snoke was nice as well. Then most of the other legendaries were not very exciting. In set 1s, there were only very few legendaries that you didn't want to find. In this expansion, it was the opposite. It was pretty much just most of the legendaries were bad and only a few were worth having. So the advantage of this is that it did make the game a bit more accessible, but overall I feel like the downsides outweighs the negative outweighs the positive here, because obviously it means that there were not really any chase card outside of the showcases. There were not really any chase cards, and there were just a lot of legendaries that just felt very bad by opening them. So I think overall the booster opening experience of this set was significantly worse than in Spark of Rebellion, and I think the main offender on this particular end is the fact that simply those very bad legendaries. I'm okay with legendaries being situational, and I think this is what FFG was going for. They were going to make like legendaries that were more situational, and I think there's no problem with it. But the problem is like those cards here, especially the one I'm showing on the screen here, they're not situational. They're just outright bad. They're not. They're not the. I mean, the Mandalorian, for example, is a good example. Is probably the best out of those 4 cards, and even the Mandalorian saw very little play, and even in decks in which it saw play, it was very niche. So yeah, I believe that yes, it's okay to make legendaries situationals and not being just all stars like Luke Skywalker or Vader that's going to see play in almost every single deck of their colors. But in the meantime, you do want to have legendaries being strong and at least strong in their decks. And in this case, it feels like even in the perfect deck for those respective cards, those cards were not good. So that's the main problem I have with this, and I think it hurt the booster opening experience, and it probably also hurted the profitability of this expansion, as we saw a lot of shops not being able to sell their booster box. And I think that the main reason for this is because at the end of the day, you can't really plan on opening showcase. They are so rare. So at the end of the day, you're opening boosters to get legendaries. Like, as I said, the rares and uncommons, commons, you can get them very easily. Really the chase cards and what sell and doesn't sell in expansion are the legendaries. And because the showcase are so rare. So people are going to be buying booster boxes to get those legendaries. And in this case, there's just no reason to buy that many booster boxes because they were just only 2 or 3 good legendaries in the set. Which I think is not a good... it's not a good marketing strategy, and it's not a good, and it doesn't feel particularly good, especially for people who like to open boosters. Moving on, another very big negative for the game is that one of the 3 new mechanics that the expansion introduced was effectively completely useless in Constructed. So yes, I mean capture was playable in limited, and capture definitely was a lot stronger in limited, and some capture card definitely saw play in limited, but in Constructed this mechanic has been completely ignored. I think the only capture card that saw a little bit of play was Relentless Pursuit in the Boba deck, and honestly more because of Boba being so strong than the capture mechanic being strong as a general rule. You can see all those legendaries. You can make the argument, yes, well, this was meant to be a limited mechanics. And I personally disagree with this. Look at those cards. Those are legendary cards. Jabba the Hutt is a rare leader. Do you really think that those leaders were meant for limited? No, they were obviously meant to be playable in Constructed. And unfortunately, they didn't saw any play in Constructed. Capture is simply just a mechanic that is there's too many removals, too many ways to get your unit back. The capture cards were overcosted or too situational. For example, Jabba the Hutt requiring you to capture with another unit. So you need to have another unit in play as Jabba deploys to be able to use this. Yeah, it just was unnecessary. Just the loops that you had to go through to jump through in order to make capture work was just simply not worth it at all. Finalizer was overcosted. Rule of Respect was also way too situational. Yeah, that overall capture has been a pretty massive failure as far as Constructed play is concerned. And as much as FFG wants to say that limited is as important as Constructed, it simply isn't true in reality. In reality, of course, the vast majority of people play Constructed over draft. Even in games like Magic the Gathering, when draft has been pushed for a long time, people usually prefer to play Constructed. And if FFG really want to make limited a core part of the Star Wars Limited experience, they need to organize tournaments that are in the limited format, and nothing prevents them from doing that. So I feel like as much as I like draft simply is, the reality is that people are not really interested in getting better in drafting because because there's no draft tournament. So if FFG really want to push the draft format, they need to make it. They need to make tournaments and organize official tournaments with real significant prize pools in order for people to be incentivized to play more limited. I mean, I personally love limited Star Wars Limited. I think it's great, but at the end of the day, I will always play more constructed because that's where the competitive scene is centered around. So anyway, captures was a failed mechanic for the most important game mode of the game, which is constructed. Other negative is that I feel like that the set overall was not impactful enough for a set that doubled card pool in size. So what I'm trying to say here is that Shadow of the Galaxy doubled the card pool of the game. We had about the same amount of cards that Spark of Rebellion. So if Shadow of the Galaxy was just as balanced and as strong as Spark of Rebellion, in an ideal world, we should be sitting at a 50-50, where every deck in the game should have about a 50% cards from Shadow of the Galaxy and 50% from Spark of Rebellion. Also, in terms of leader representation, we should see about 50% of leader from set 1 and 50% from set 2. The reality was not that at all. The reality is that you were seeing about a 60 to 70% cards coming from set 1 in each deck, and about a 30 to 40% card from set 2 in every deck. And the same goes for the leaders. Most of the leaders that Soul play in set were set 1 leaders compared to set 2 leaders. So that is, in my opinion, not a good thing. That means that this set was overall underpowered compared to set 2, and we have numbers to back this up. Overall, yes, the set was underpowered. And I think that, once again, coming back to the legendary issue, this has an issue on... This has we often talk about power creep, where basically the new sets invalidates a lot of the previous sets, and that's a problem because obviously you want it's a problem. Power creep is a problem because invalidating people's deck, invalidating people's collection, doesn't feel good. But at least the advantage of power creep is like it does create new blood. It does refresh the gaming experience, and it does create a new meta, and that is by itself is exciting. The problem with power decreep is that not only it from a marketing standpoint, it's not great for your game because it means that people have less incentive to buy the new set and to buy the new booster box, so it's not good money for you. And the second inconvenience is that it creates this stale metagame where the new meta overall felt pretty similar to the previous ones. Like pretty much, we'll talk a little bit about this later, but one of the reasons why this happened is because there were just simply too many archetypes that were pushed by the set 2 that didn't make it to the competitive. If you remember about all the different archetypes that set 2 is pushing, the Mandalorians, the upgrade archetypes with the Mandalorian with Bo-Katan, the upgrade archetype with Gar Saxon and the Mandalorian, the capture archetypes with Jabba the Hutt, the small goal archetypes with Ando Onaka and Lando, and the Bad Patch archetype with Hunter, and the list goes on. Like it's not an excessive list. There's just so many archetypes that have been pushed by the second set and didn't make any impact on competitive at all. And I think like this huge waste of design space, this huge waste of cards, basically strongly negatively affected the meta, because as a result, most of the decks that basically ended up being successful in set 2 were basically just updated version of set 1. So if you think about what are the most successful decks of set 2, you talk about, of course, Boba Green, Boba Yellow. Those existed and were some of the best decks. Were just some of the best decks in Star Wars already. Sabine Green, same. Kira Green was basically just the new Krennic Green. It was basically the same deck with a different leader. We also had even the blue-white archetypes, even the blue-white Han were basically just a new version of the Shiroots. It was just an updated version of Shiroots. Granted, it was a lot more powerful, but it was still like the same idea of the deck. It was playing mostly the same cards. Same, we got those hand, the old hand was also very successful. The Palpatines, all those decks already exist in Spark of Rebellion. So I think it's positive that I don't want all the previous archetypes to be invalidated with a new set. So I don't want to have excessive power creep like in Yu-Gi-Oh, where it's almost like an organic rotation where basically new archetypes completely push aside the old ones. I don't want that, but this is the other extreme. We are basically too far off on the other extreme where the new set simply did not refresh the competitive environment enough, in my opinion. Once again, compared to the amount of cards that were added, because obviously it is to be expected that if you have a set that has like 5% more cards, then obviously you're not going to expect the set to have a massive impact on the meta. But here in this case, it added 100% more cards. It basically doubled the card pool, so you would expect a lot more changes into the meta than what we actually experienced. Another major issue that this set caused is like I think that set 2 exacerbated the imbalances that of set 1. So in set 1, kind of like everybody acknowledged the fact that Boba was overtuned and the deck was overall the best deck in the competitive scene, and that's fine because in every environment, in every metagame, there's always going to be a best deck. There's always going to be a deck that is better than the others. This is inevitable. The question is, how dominant is the deck? Does it have counters? How big of a percentage of the meta does it represent? And I think in set 1, Boba was, yes, it was the best deck, quote unquote, but it was very counterable. You could play decks that really would have a very good matchup against Boba Green. The main would be, of course, Heart Control. And Heart Control itself would be countered by other decks. And this created this dynamic experience where every deck had its quality and its inconvenience. And that's the reason why set 1 was particularly well balanced, in my opinion. The problem with set 2 is that it basically exacerbated the problems of set 1. So the first one was obviously Sabine. Sabine was very, very strong in set 1, but it got so much stronger in set 2. It was incredible. It got all the best cards in set 2 basically fits in Sabine. If you think about it, Wrecker, Poe, Cassian, some of the best cards in the set, and all of them fit right in Sabine. Sabine was basically dialed up to 11 in this new set, and that's why it was such a strong deck. So obviously it is an aggro deck, so it has counters, but it was incredibly overtuned in set 2, in my opinion. Second problem, of course, the elephant in the room, is that Boba got even harder to counter. So Boba, in terms of raw power, did not really get so much more powerful. The best cards in Boba were still Cunning, Fire Spray, that kind of thing. But the difference is that in the previous set 1, Boba had counters. You could actually play a Heart Control and counter Boba. In set 2, it's a lot more debatable. If I'm playing Heart Control versus the new Boba Green, I'm most likely going to have a good matchup in game 1, but then if the Boba player is smart, he will have sideboard cards to counter me. And in set 1, yes, you had some card that will improve your matchup against control, but the matchup will still be a negative matchup, while here you can completely flip the matchup the other way with the sideboard with Boba. We had the introduction of Bazine, the introduction of TIE Phantoms, the introduction of Palpatine's returns in order to bring those Relentless back into play a lot easier. We also had all those smuggle cards like DL44 blasters. All those cards are insane assets for Boba to play against control, and that means that basically Boba did not have any real counter in set 2, and that's the reason why Boba was so dominant. So every issue that we had in set 1 in terms of balance got exacerbated in set 2. So yeah, meta was, and now we talk about the elephant in the room here, is that the meta was dominated by Boba in an unhealthy way. So what I mean by this is that whenever you are judging the balance of a metagame, you are talking about what are the different decks and how much of the percentage of the meta they occupy. So here you can see here that you also see Boba Green. So there's a massive gap here between the Boba Green, Sabine, Boba Yellow compared to the rest of the meta. And more importantly, you see that Boba Yellows and Boba Greens here are counted as two separated decks. But in reality, those decks are fairly similar to one another. And you could argue that they should be merged into one because even though, yes, they are quite different from one another, they still have the same leader, they still play the same core cards that makes them so powerful. So both of them are still kind of mid-rangey, tempo-y deck. So it almost feels like they should be meshed together. Even though, so you can even see Boba Red here having a significant portion of the meta. So this is kind of the most... this is the result, by the way, this is the result of the top 8 of week 1, week 2, and week 3 of the planetary qualifiers. So it doesn't even represent all the tournaments before that, which also were dominated by Boba. Maybe not as extremely, but they were also kind of very dominated by Boba as well. And now let's take a look here. If we look at only the leaders without taking into account, we basically combine all the Bobas together. We are doing it the same as, you see, here you can see there's no twice the same leaders. Here we're just combining the Bobas together and here you see the problem here. Here it goes. 94 out of all the Boba decks that saw play that did the top 8 result in PQ, we got a 94 Bobas. And I thank one of my friend Chivalry, who actually provided me with those graphs. I think those graphs are very, very telling. You can see here the imbalance of leaders is just absolutely insanely extreme. That is just not a good thing for the meta. And then finally, of course, here we got some PQ winners here. Out of the different PQs, the overwhelming majority of them, like there is there is a 13 PQ differences between the number 2, the number 3, and the number 1 and the number 2. That is just insane. So yeah, I think the numbers speak by themselves. Yeah, meta was Boba was far more dominant in set 2 than in set 1, and the main reason for this is the fact that Boba was able to counter what normally would be able to counter them, on top of adding additional options that also strongly help the deck against other decks. Like, for example, of course, Boba Fett's armor was one of those cards that also made the cards a lot stronger. Another is obviously Maul. Maul was also a massive upgrade for the deck, for Boba Green specifically, and so on. So let's go back to more positive things. So this was all the negatives. So now I just wanted to write up on my favorite card of the set, and my favorite card of the set was Tech. Tech was my favorite card of the set. It really had a lot of very strong options in late game for heroism. It was a very interesting card that has a lot of interesting implications for the game and some interesting combo, notably with the Tech DJ combo. Tech by itself allowed Hold On to see play in set 2. It was the biggest upgrade for the deck, and I'm really glad that Hold On saw a lot of play in set 2 because, as you know, it is my favorite leader. So from a pure gameplay standpoint, my favorite card of the set was Tech. I don't think it's the strongest card of the set, but it is definitely my favorite one. As far as my least favorite card of the set, it is Boba Fett's armor, for multiple reasons. The first reason, of course, is that because it reinforced a deck that was already very powerful. And I personally think that the game would have been much better off without that card being introduced to the game. The second reason why I strongly dislike Boba Fett's armor is that it creates those games where Boba Fett's armor it's a kind of card that is kind of bad against a lot of decks. Like, for example, it's not really good against aggro. It's not really good against hard control. So it's not good against decks that are very extreme in their game plan. However, it is very good against people who want to play the game fair, which is also a bad influence on the meta, because now playing a fair deck, so playing sort of a mid-rangey deck against Boba Fett, becomes very, very difficult because this card exists, and it forces people to either play blue to have access to Rival's Fall, or have to have some confiscate in their deck to get rid of the armor. that is just not healthy because it creates those kind of very bad games where, oh yeah, I got my Buffett's armor on my Boba. Do you have an answer or do you not have an answer? If you have the specific card that answers this card, which there's not that many of them, then the game continues as normal. If you don't have the answer when you've lost the game, not a very fun experience. So it was not a very fun card to play against. It added unnecessary. I don't think that. I honestly truly believe. So people say that banning Boba Fett's armor would be enough to put Boba back in line. I strongly disagree with this. I think that Boba Fett's armor, at the end of the day, it was a very good option for Boba to have, but it was not even like an auto-include in the deck. And people who include in the deck rarely put 3 of them in their deck. They would just rather be like 2 of them and maybe more in the sideboard. Also, people would just be playing no in the main deck, some in the sideboard. So it was not like a core card of the deck, and I'm pretty sure that Boba would have done just fine without it. But it was definitely my least favorite card of the set. So overall, what is my rating of this expansion? Overall, what did I think about it? I think that there's a lot of cool thing going on with this expansion and a lot of positive, which I mentioned already. But overall, I think that the bad stuff outweighs the bad. Overall, I feel like this expansion was a fairly weak expansion, and it is unfortunate because set 2 expansions are very, very important because most of the time games got a lot of hype at the beginning because they get a lot of hype at the beginning because of it's a new thing. People don't want, there's the FOMO, the fear of missing out. And the second set and the third set are really the real test for a game to see if the game is going to perform on the long run. And the second set is very, very important for the health of the game. And I feel like overall, this set did not meet expectation in terms of what it needs to accomplish for the game. So my final rating for the set is a 4 out of 10. It was not just to make you understand what I mean by this rating. I don't think it's a horrible set. I don't think this is the worst set in the world. It was definitely a fine set, but I would say for me 4 out of 10 means below average. It is below what I would expect to be average for a set. I have a rating that is very literal, like if you are 10 out of 10 means the set was perfect, absolutely flawless. Flawless is very rare. It's almost impossible to create something flawless. The rating for Spark of Rebellion was a 9 out of 10. This one is a 4 out of 10. Some people will say that my rating is a little bit harsh, but as I said, it means exactly what it means. 5 out of 10 means that you are average, an average set. So basically, in my argument, a 6 out of 10 for a set would be a positive rating for a set. So just to kind of put things in perspective, a 6 out of 10 would be a good rating. So 4 out of 10 means that you're not bad, you're not terrible, but you are below average. You are below what I would expect a set of Star Wars Limited to be. So this is kind of my final thought on this. Let me know in the comments below if you agree. Is there other points of Shadow of the Galaxy that you liked and didn't like? And let me know in the comments below if you agree with my rating. What would you rate differently? What are the things that I've maybe missed? And so far, this is probably going to be my last video when I'm going to talk about Shadow of the Galaxy. Probably all my next videos are going to be talking. I might do a PQ report for the last weekend of PQs, but pretty much after this, I'm kind of done with the set, and we're going to be moving forward with the very exciting Twilight of the Republic, and hopefully some great stuff for the future of the game. With all that being said, thank you so much for following that video, and I'll see you next time.